Hello, this is Joey, and this is Game of Authors. And today I'm going to do the two books with one stone tag. So for today's video, I'm going to show you number 2 in the deck, which is Charles Dickens, who wrote A Tale of Two Cities. A wonderful book and one of my favorite books by Charles Dickens. So this tag was created by Shawn the Book Maniac. It's been around for quite a while. It's one I enjoyed watching before I was on BookTube. And I was recently tagged by Brian at Bookwanting. So let's get started. Number 1, the second to the last book you read. For me, that was the book of Isaiah in the English Standard Version of the Bible. However, I don't track my Bible reading on Goodreads, so if I look at my Goodreads, the second to the last book I read was The Magician's Nephew by C.S. Lewis. Number 2, the second book from the top of your TBR. For Nonfiction November, I added some books to my TBR, and the second to the top is this book about Johnny Cash. It's called Johnny Cash in Words, Pictures, and Music by Michael Heatley. This is one, it's got a lot of pictures and some information there about Johnny Cash. I've read a lot of books by Johnny Cash or about Johnny Cash. And so my son got that for me for Father's Day a few years ago, and I just haven't, I've looked through the pictures and kind of scanned it, but I haven't read it all the way through, so that's one I thought I would read. In fact, I've kind of been thinking about a video I'd like to do about just books, biographies, autobiographies related to Johnny Cash, because I've read so many of them, and there's still several that I haven't read yet. But anyhow, something I love the music of Johnny Cash. Well, I'll talk about that in a different video. Number 3, two-star reads. Both of these are two-star reads that I read this year in 2019. One is The Old Man and the Gun and Other Tales of True Crime by David Grann. I picked that book up because of I had seen that there was a movie coming out with Robert Redford, and it seemed interesting. I saw the trailer for it, so I picked the book up. And for some reason, I had in my mind that this book was a book of short stories about crime. And I was there's 3 stories in there, and I was halfway through the second one, and I was thinking, why would he write this? This story isn't very good. I don't understand the point of it. When it finally occurred to me that these are actually true crime stories, so he wasn't writing fiction, he was writing about something that actually happened. And it kind of clarified it a bit in my mind, but I should have seen right there in the title where it said true crime, but I still was thinking that was just part of his fictional title. Anyhow, long story short, the book I didn't think was very good, even once I figured out it was true crime. He was compared to Truman Capote on the back of that book, and I've read In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, which is a 5-star read, and I don't see the comparison, but maybe I'd have to read more by that author. The second 2-star read I read this year was William McKinley, which is part of the American Presidents series, the American Presidents number 25, William McKinley by Kevin Phillips. I gave that a 2-star read. It was okay. My review on Goodreads was one of the most boring biographies I've ever read. Unless I missed it, I don't recall any mention of McKinley's assassination in the book. And I'm not sure how or why you would write a biography of William McKinley and never even mention the fact that he was assassinated, which is probably going to be one of the most interesting parts of the story. But that was a 2-star read. Number 4, 2 great books by the same author. So this is exciting to me because I get to mention one of my Indiana authors, and that is an author who not only wrote 2 great books, but those 2 great books both won the Pulitzer Prize. And he's one of only maybe 2 authors in fiction, maybe some other authors in drama. But it's Booth Tarkington, who was from Indianapolis and probably the most well-known Indiana writer. He wrote The Magnificent Ambersons, which won the Pulitzer Prize in 1919, and Alice Adams, which won the Pulitzer Prize in 1922. And those are both great books. I have those 2 novels in this one book that was, this is a book from I think the 50s. It's called The Gentleman from Indianapolis, and it includes 3 of his novels, those 2 I mentioned, and also Penrod, which was his novel, his children's fiction. And also some other short stories here. And what I love about these old books, the Booth Tarkington books, and a lot of these books written in the 1900s, is I love these pictures. If you have seen Magnificent Ambersons, you'll recognize this as a scene from Magnificent Ambersons. And then here at the beginning, this is a scene from Alice Adams, where she is, Alice is at the dance, and she's pretending that her partner has gone, and she's just waiting for him. But the reality is she has no one who has taken her to the dance. And so those are two great Pulitzer Prize winning novels. Magnificent Ambersons was part of his Growth trilogy, number 2 in a trilogy of books that he wrote. Both great books. I'll talk about those more hopefully in other videos. Number 5, 2 bails or 2 books you wish you had bailed on, or 2 books you hated. The last two books that I bailed on, or a couple books I bailed on recently, one was The 42nd Parallel by John Dos Passos, which is number 1 in his USA trilogy, I believe. And it wasn't really a bad book. I didn't hate it. I was kind of enjoying it. It's experimental. It's an interestingly written novel in that it's a novel, but there are also little pieces of biography of people who were well known at the time, and little ad jingles that are kind of like pushed in. So you'll be reading fiction, then you'll be reading biography, then you'll be reading, just these little jingles or these little advertisements for things. This is probably early 1900s. I was listening to it on audiobook, and when they got, it's stories about different people, and when they got to the end of the first person, I kind of just lost interest and didn't get back to it. I'm not saying I would never go back and read it, but I bailed on it. The other one is The Crossing by Cormac McCarthy, which is number 2 in his Border trilogy. I really like Cormac McCarthy books for the most part. Most of them I really like. Blood Meridian I just kind of liked. But this one, I was so bored. I couldn't get back to it, and I hate to say that, but I finally just quit reading it, and I may get back to it eventually. Number 6, 2 favorite reads so far this year, and I'm going to kind of cheat on this one because I have 2 new favorite authors that I really liked that I discovered this year, and I read 2 favorite books by each author, so I'm going to talk about both of those. One is James Hilton, and the 2 books that I really liked were Random Harvest and Goodbye, Mr. Chips. Hilton, I think, wrote probably both of these books maybe in the 30s, and they're both based in, set against the backdrop of World War I. So Goodbye, Mr. Chips is the story of a teacher at a boarding school, and he kind of looks back on his life. There's a love story element to it, but most recently what's happening in his life is so many of these students that he taught that are going away to fight in World War I. So very interesting, very good book, and a short novel if you're looking for a short novel to read, and it was made into a good movie. Random Harvest is also set against the backdrop of World War I, about a soldier who comes back from World War I with a head wound and essentially amnesia, and kind of he lives this life for a while not knowing who he is, and then he ends up back in his real life, but then he can't remember what happened during those years, and there's romance and twists and kind of a lot of twists and turns, and just very well written, so I liked that book. Another author I discovered this year that I really liked is Ray Bradbury. And the 2 books that I liked from Bradbury this year are Fahrenheit 451 and Dandelion Wine, which is number 1 in his Greentown series. Fahrenheit 451, I love this book. I love, it's about a fireman in the future when the job of firemen is to burn books. Rather than put out fires, they start fires to either burn books or burn whole houses if there are too many books in them. And it's kind of this idea of that in a future environment where the goal would be to, in order to make everyone happy, we have to crush dissenting or independent thought. And dissenting and independent thought largely comes from reading books. So, maybe the first thing is to try to eliminate certain books. But then ultimately there's a realization that as long as books are out there, people are going to read and think things that maybe we don't want them to think. And so it's not an idea of, we don't want ideas going back and forth. We just want you to think like the mainstream or the government or whoever is is in charge, think this way. So, and you might say, but look at these books, and it's like, no, we don't care what those books say. Stop reading books, watch TV. Books make people sad, TV makes people happy. So stop thinking and just go with what we tell you. And it's kind of, this idea. And so what a wonderful book. Secondly, Dandelion Wine, which is kind of Bradbury's nostalgic book where he writes about his time period growing up. And I've come to realize that probably my favorite time period to read about is early 1900s, or maybe the first half of the 1900s, small town in rural America. I just love reading about that time period. Also somewhat in the cities as well, like with the Booth Tarkington books, which are set in Indianapolis. But even then, Indianapolis was still somewhat a town, not like it is today. But those two books by Bradbury. And I will say on that number 6 prompt, 2 favorite reads so far this year, those don't have to be by the same author. I just happen to have 2 favorite reads by James Hilton and 2 favorites by Ray Bradbury. Number 7, 2 new favorite booktubers. I'm going to say Faith at Faith and Books. She is delightful, and I just really enjoy listening to her talk about books. And she's done a lot of the tags that are going around, but I feel like she's not getting enough people watching her videos. So go check out Faith at Faith and Books. Also, Brian, Bookwanting is a new favorite, and he's not as new as I am, but he's relatively new, and he's the one who tagged me in this video. Which I think I mentioned that at the beginning. So those are 2 new favorites. Number 8, a book that you've read twice. That would be, I'm going to pick Peace Like a River by Leif Anger. I've read this book twice now, and this was one of 2 books that originally got me started on my journey of reading fiction and loving fiction. This along with Gilead by Marilyn Robinson. Let me just read a blurb here. Frank McCourt says, written in prose tart and crisp as a Minnesota autumn, Peace Like a River is seductive and deliciously American, and there are passages so wondrous and wise you'll want to claw yourself with pleasure. And I would agree with that. This is a book about an older brother who avenges a crime that took place against his family, and he goes on the run as a fugitive. And it's the widowed father and the younger brother, who I believe suffers from asthma, and the younger sister go on a journey to try to find their fugitive brother. It is written, it is beautiful, it is, it's a journey story, and it's a wonderful book. And I've gone back and read it a second time now and loved it as much as I had loved it the first time, probably back around 2007 or so when I read it. And one of the characters I love is the sister, because kind of parallel to this journey they're taking, she is a lover of old Western movies and books and stories. And this takes place probably, I'm going to say mid-20th century, I think. Maybe later 20th century, I'm not sure. I can't remember offhand. But she's writing this story of kind of a cowboy hero, and she's kind of viewing her brother, her fugitive brother, as this cowboy hero. And she writes this beautiful prose and poetry and just these little snippets of she's trying to, she's writing the story. And I loved her little writing throughout the story. And so this is just a wonderful book that I have read 2 times. Number 9, 2 fabulous quotes from books you've read recently. So a book I reread recently is No Country for Old Men by Cormac McCarthy, who I mentioned. This is one of his books that I really loved. And this is a quote from Sheriff Ed Tom Bell, played by Tommy Lee Jones in the movie. He says, "People complain about the bad things that happen to them that they don't deserve, but they seldom mention the good, about what they done to deserve them things. I don't recall that I ever give the good Lord all that much to cause to smile on me, but he did." So that's one. The second quote is from a few soldiers in a book called Brave Men by Ernie Pyle. Ernie Pyle is another one of my Indiana writers. He was probably the most popular journalist during World War II. He died at the tail end of World War II while literally in battle doing his job. So all of his books that are written were written during the war or just prior to America entering the war. But most of his books, and these books are compilations of articles that he wrote for newspapers that were being sent back to America, telling the stories of these soldiers and sailors over there fighting for our country. And so this is from the book Brave Men. And the backdrop of this quote is, it's D-Day at Sicily, and the Americans are on the ship getting ready to go in and attack, and they find there are 5 searchlights that all focus right on their ship, and they're waiting to see what happens. It says, we couldn't possibly move fast enough to run out of those beams. We were within simple and easy gunning distance. We were a sitting duck. We were stuck on the end of 5 merciless poles of light, and we were utterly helpless. When that 5th searchlight stopped on us, all my children became orphans, one of the officers said later. Another one said, straw that broke my back was when the anchor went down. The chain made so much noise you could have heard it in Rome. A third one said, the fellow standing next to me was breathing so hard I couldn't hear the anchor go down. Then I realized there wasn't anybody standing next to me. Great quote. All right, number 10, tag a number of booktubers and the total must be divisible by 2. I'm only gonna tag 2, and the 2 that I'm gonna tag are Faith at Faith and Books, who I mentioned earlier, and also the History Shelf, who I've actually checked out her page, and she's got a lot of interesting looking videos, although I haven't actually watched any of them yet, but I've got them all on my save to watch later. So Faith at Faith and Books and the History Shelf are 2 booktubers that I'm tagging to do this tag. So thank you for watching this, and I look forward to seeing you again. This is Joey at Game of Authors.